Assignment 4, Part 3. The changing relationship between diaspora communities and Eretz Yisrael in the modern world. The traditional rabbinic attitude towards Eretz Yisrael was to see it as the eternal homeland of the Jews, from which they had been exiled. Jews should settle in the lands of the diaspora, but always remember that their homeland was somewhere else. However, this attitude also emphasized that it was forbidden for the Jews as a people to return to the land on their own initiative. The Jewish people would only return to Eretz Yisrael as the result of divine intervention, when God had decided that the time was right. Before that time, individual Jews could certainly settle on their own or in family groups, but collective mass action was forbidden. It was seen as a challenge to God's authority and divine plan. The idea that the diaspora was exile would be challenged by many modern Jews, who began to feel that the lands in which they lived were their real homelands. The more freedoms and comfort they enjoyed in these lands, the more they tended to lose their connection with Eretz Yisrael. They did not deny the historical connection, but they saw it as only that. Eretz Yisrael was their homeland of the past. The idea that it was forbidden for the Jews collectively to return to Eretz Yisrael would be challenged from another direction, the Zionist movement, which began to develop at the end of the 19th century. Different parts of the Zionist movement challenged the idea in different ways. Let us hear two different voices from the early 20th century, before the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948.
Shalom to you all. My name is Menachem. I grew up in Russia, but I recently left to come to the land of Israel. Why? Russia was not my home, and it had never been home to the Jews. Other people and nations are able to live in their homelands, so why not the Jews? Our homeland is not currently under our control. Our people are scattered all over the world. This needs to change. We have two opposition groups facing us, one non-Jewish and one Jewish. The non-Jews controlling our land are not enthusiastic about letting us come back. Slowly, we are working to persuade them and the world that we need a Jewish state, and that this would be a good thing for the world. The other opposition comes from Jews who say that it is some kind of a rebellion against God to actively initiate a collective return of the people to the land. This is an old superstitious position that has developed over thousands of years. As far as I'm concerned, it is total nonsense. There's only one thing that can keep us from going back, and that's lack of willpower. If we want to do it enough, it will happen. Enough with this ridiculous idea that we have to trust God to do what is best for us. We've been trusting in God for thousands of years, and where did it ever get us except pain and persecution? We need to take our fate into our own hands. We need to create a society in our land as quickly as possible to continue the work that stopped thousands of years ago. We need to create ourselves as a nation in our own land. It is time to stop talking of the Messiah. We are our own Messiah. God had his chance, now it's ours.
The second voice.
I hear everything that Menachem said. He's right and he's wrong. I'll tell you what I mean. My name is Shulamit. I am a follower of the great Rav Kook. Most of what I want to say I learnt from him. It's absolutely true that the Jews need to get back to the land, create a society of their own. Anyone who does that is involved in important work. The truth is that it is also holy work. It is part of God's plan. The process of returning to Eretz Israel has been badly misunderstood. It is not correct that only once people are perfect and God forgives us, we will then be able to come back to Eretz Israel with the Messiah. That's what people have believed for centuries, but it is not correct. Instead, we must make the messianic process happen by taking things into our own hands and returning to Eretz Israel to build it up ourselves. That is what God is waiting for. The process will happen because of the work of men and women like Menachem and myself. The difference between us is that he doesn't recognize that everything that he is doing in building up the land is God's work, part of God's plan. One day he'll realize though. He talks secular, he thinks secular, but in reality he acts holy. We're not just any old people. We are chosen. We are God's servants, and that is why we must work our land.
The secular Zionists, like Menachem, simply ignored the traditional rabbinic prohibition and claimed that returning to Eretz Yisrael was a human process rather than a divine one. The religious Zionists, like Shulamit, believed that creating a godly society in Eretz Yisrael was the trigger needed for the messianic process. Many of the Jews who had either broken their links with the land or were opposed to Zionism on traditional rabbinic grounds were persuaded to move to Eretz Yisrael as a result of the Shoah. They could not see their diaspora homelands as safe anymore. Things had changed in a way that could not have previously been believed. Many Jews now became strong Zionists in their support for a Jewish state. Nowadays, most Jews in the diaspora, whilst loyal to their own countries, support the idea of a Jewish state. Most feel deeply connected with Israel, and a huge number have visited at some point in their lives. They might not all like everything that Israel does all the time, but the country has profound meaning for them. Israel has become a central part of modern-day Jewish identity. Summary. We have seen how modernity completely transformed the model of a Jewish community. Because the modern state took on many of the roles which the Jewish community had filled, joining a community became a purely voluntary decision for an individual Jew to make. It is interesting that something similar happened in modern-day Israel also. Even in a Jewish state, there is no pressure to join a community. There are thousands of synagogues all over the country, but very few of them function as a community. There are some important exceptions. Most Haredim, ultra-Orthodox Jews, are clearly part of communities. Kibbutzim and Moshavim form different kinds of close community. However, for most Israelis, the modern Western model applies. Community is voluntary, for those people who wish to gain something that can be achieved within a community framework. In the modern Jewish world in general, very few Jews in the world today live the same Jewish life as their great-grandparents. Everything has changed for them, and at the root of this is their fundamentally changed understanding of Jewish community. That's the end of assignment 4 in total.